I'm going to share my screen here. Sorry, a few technical things to go through. All right. Can everyone see that? Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right. So first, thank you for everyone for joining today on this Friday to talk about a topic that honestly, there's endless discussion that you can have on it. We're not going to cover every single basis you could ever imagine with this, but we have three panelists here that can give some great insights and valuable conversation starters. And I think that's what this is. This is a conversation starter. And there's a long runway that we can go with this. So I wanted to first see if I can move the page. Yep. So just so everyone knows, the session will be recorded, like I just said. I think everyone has themselves on mute. That's great. And like I said, start of a conversation. This is not a be all end all. There's way too much to cover. My teammate, Sam, you want to raise your hand? Where's Sam? There he is. My teammate, Sam, he'll be monitoring the chat. So feel free to put anything in the chat that you want. Questions, comments, we're encouraging those. We did have programs submit questions ahead of time. So we're going to use those questions. But if we have time at the end, definitely we'll toss it to Sam and see if any questions came through. And now I want to welcome the panelists. I'm so excited to introduce everybody. So what we'll do is I'll introduce the panelists, and then I'll pose a question to them specific to that panelist. But first, I also wanted to mention, these are the startling stats that's happening in the girls in sports. They're dropping out at twice the rate of boys by the age of 14. I mean, that's pretty startling. Girls are being offered athletic opportunities nearly 25% less, and that equates to 1.3 million less opportunities. So that's a sizable gap. And then I thought this last one was really interesting, and that we can get some perspective from our panelists too. So 77% of female sport leaders reported that a lack of role models was a barrier to girls' participation. And we'll dig into that a little bit today. So our first panelist is Justine Siegel. Justine is the founder of Baseball for All. Just if you have a moment, Google Justine. She is featured on an HBO special that really illuminates the baseball and softball, and there's so much nuance to dive in there. And I learned so much after watching that piece. So I would definitely encourage you to go watch that. And it really illuminates a lot of issues that we're going to talk about today. There we go. So Justine, she became the first woman to coach for a Major League Baseball team and to throw batting practice to an MLB team. And like I said, she founded Baseball for All, an awesome organization for girls to play, coach, and lead in baseball. And she's also an inductee of the National Women's Sports Museum. So if everyone can welcome Justine, we're so happy to have you here. Justine, I'm going to pose a question to you, if you don't mind sharing. So what happened when you told your coach about your dream to be a baseball coach? And how did you overcome that response from him?
That's a good question. And I'll just quickly start with, I was 13 when I was first told I should quit baseball because I'm a girl. And I just decided I would play forever, but it was certainly the start of an uphill battle. So I was the only girl at this baseball camp. And so I told my coach, who I really respected, that I wanted to become a coach like him. And I wanted to coach at the college level. And he immediately laughed at me and said, no man would listen to a woman on a baseball field. And I was so embarrassed because I was such a shy kid. But, you know, as the day went on, I kind of thought, who's he to decide what I can do? And I went from there. But there was certainly no one to look up to. There were no women coaching at the time. There was barely any women I knew who were playing baseball. But it was just something that I had in my heart, and I just kind of went for it. But it was hard, and I would imagine most people would, especially most kids, would have quit right at that point. And I've certainly quit so many other things because I was told I couldn't do it. So.
Thank you for that, Justine. Our next panelist is Nicole, and correct me if I'm wrong on the pronunciation here. Verasi?
Yes.
Okay, I got it right.
Good job.
I was practicing, Nicole, and I was hoping to get it right. All right. So Nicole has spent her life advocating for gender equality. She founded Shattering Glass, and again, Google Shattering Glass, fantastic organization. And she actually founded it on International Women's Day, so great synergy there. And its mission is to, I might not say that word right. Nicole, do you want to?
Oh, effectuate the much needed changes.
Much needed changes to ensure our daughters, granddaughters, and their daughters will not be held down by gender discrimination. So, Nicole, we're so thankful that you're here today and for all the work that you do for gender equality.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course, yeah. So I wanted to ask you, Nicole, how can we make coaching more inclusive and accessible for women?
I would say from the youth organization perspective, you need to take kind of a top-down approach. You essentially want to set the standards of conduct in terms of why, one, it's important to have women coaches, and two, have a code of conduct that you actually kind of enforce. So women aren't discriminated against. It's like not necessarily intentional, but there's this existing bias. Oftentimes you'll encounter bias against women coaches. But to make it more inclusive, you start with that. And then as far as actually bringing the coaches in, recruiting the women coaches, when they see that you want to have them there and you give them the tools to succeed, be it practice plans to make them feel comfortable to jump in, because with youth sports organizations, you have, a lot of mothers at times, or younger women who might in the community who might want to get involved, but just are a little reticent and haven't done it before. But if you give them the tools and maybe a mentor for the first season, I think those are things you could do to make it more inclusive, make it more welcoming. Because there are a host of volunteers. Many youth sports organizations are short on volunteers, and that's a whole other area to tap into, a whole set of resources. So that's what I would say would be a start.
Nicole, I appreciate that. And our third panelist is Sarah Dwyer Schick. So excited to have Sarah here. She founded the Sports Bra Project as a result of her experiences working in soccer in the US and abroad. And she's making play more accessible for girls and women. And you can see the litany of accomplishments she's had in her career on this slide. And Sarah, we're so thankful that you're here today and to give your insights. And I wanted to pose a question to you as well. Can you talk about the goals that you have for the Sports Bra Project? What are kind of the overarching goals and mission?
At its simplest level, we're really here. It's a piece of equipment, and we're providing the piece of equipment which increases access. That's kind of the surface part, and that's what we started when we started the project talking about publicly, because that was an acceptable conversation to talk about equipment missing and what was needed for girls and women to play. The bigger part of our project is addressing why that's still the case. And for us, it really comes down to lack of females in leadership and decision-making roles in sport. I firmly believe that if women were equally represented, they would be we would be ordering sports bras, just like we'd order compression shorts, just like we'd order jerseys. And they would just be a standard piece of equipment. We have so many young girls playing, and as you've noted and sort of pulling out the stats, they drop out at an age, and the age that they're dropping out is about the time when puberty hits. And so that's when their bodies are changing, and they're no longer seeing themselves represented in the leadership. They no longer have a leadership that can identify and normalize their needs. So it probably gets a little more uncomfortable for some of them if they don't have a good family or friend support structure. And then so that's the second piece of the project, is to normalize those needs and experiences and have that conversation. And the third piece is to provide opportunities for young athletes to give back and to have an impact and take a leadership role and see themselves and their peers in leadership by hosting a sports bra drive. So we've had young girls teams with like U13 where they each just bring one bra to practice, but they've organized it, they've talked about it, they've had to have a conversation with their parents, and they've seen themselves in a leadership role. And then we've had larger drives. We had a young woman who just did a drive in conjunction with her bat mitzvah that collected 200 bras, which for us is absolutely wonderful. She did this, she gave a speech about why she was doing it. She's a young lacrosse player. So for her to take on that leadership role and start to have those normalizing conversations is really our big picture objective. The sports bras are sort of the vehicle, and they're important, but the other stuff is what leads to it and is what's behind it.
Thank you for that, Sarah, and thank you for founding this organization and making that conversation more normalized. So the programs that are attending today, and some others submitted questions as well. So I want to dive into those first. This is what the community that Good Sports serves is asking about. So I wanted to dive into those inquiries from them. And panelists, feel free to jump in whenever you want to. The first question here on the screen is, what are the pros and cons of establishing citywide standards for female participation in youth sports?
Who wants it?
Who wants that? Do a roundabout piece of that. Like what we rely on is organizations that are in tune with their community. Me going into an organization in Kenya and telling them that they need sports bras, they're going to look at me like, I don't fit in and I don't speak their language literally and sort of culturally, but having an organization that has representation of the people that they're serving and having them as a key part is, in my mind, one of the biggest things. So I would standardize involvement and engagement with the community that you're directly serving. It's hard.
I think the other component of this is, to the extent you can have consistency in terms of the standards that you set, it'll make the organization's job easier rather than tailoring the needs. And I don't want to say tailoring the needs, tailoring the personalities, because I think we should always tailor the needs. That's not what I meant. But consistency across the board, is particularly when we're talking about issues like recruiting female participation, I think is important.
For me, I would just the con is that sometimes citywide standards or statewide standards or conference standards, they're against the girls participating. So my sport's baseball. And so girls want to play with the boys and play baseball. And there are still rules around the country that say that they can't. And then the only way to overturn these rules are for the kids to then sue. And it's like, what kid wants to make this their high school experience? And so I guess I'm for the standards if they are in our favor. But
Great point.
Not, it causes, mayhem and hurt to kids that deserve better.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Justine. I was assuming they were in our favor.
I think the standards they're traditionally male driven. So Can we make those standards applicable and relevant? It doesn't mean lowering them, but there are different things that apply to girls and women than apply to boys. So can we incorporate them in and include standards that represent what girls are experiencing?
Yeah, is there female representation when they make those
Mhm.
standards?
Yeah.
For sure. All right. The next community question that we had, how can we help parents, schools, and youth sports stakeholders prioritize women's athletics? Another overarching question.
You can almost tell this is a women's panel because we're being so polite, waiting to jump in. I think this is obviously a thesis question, so it's sort of hard which to tackle. Awareness is obviously important. Sometimes it's endorsement. I mean, not endorsement, but like regulations. Like, right, we're here because of Title IX, because people were forced to create opportunities for girls and others. So I think it's all of those things, and that having conversations not just between those who are in charge, but also with the female athletes who are playing, and allowing parents. And obviously, we know that there are some girls who just have so many barriers to being able to play, whether that's transportation, whether they have to go home to help their brothers and sisters, get jobs, those type of things. So it's like, this is a thesis question that is really, a lot has to do with relative to where you are. But I think conversation is universal, and hearing the different viewpoints and trying to address them.
I think one of the things sometimes that comes up, and it's controversial and we could spend entire panels on it, is, does that mean we have to put in quotas? And at one level, I am against that, but at the other level, we haven't done it out of the goodness of our hearts since Title IX. We're almost 50 years on, and we still don't have equal participation, and we still don't have equal representation within things and within leadership. Is there a place for, if you don't want to use the word quota, is there a place for mandating certain representation percentages based on involvement? And as I said, it's a complicated question. I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's something that's absolutely worth discussing, even if it's within an organization where you say, look, we are serving this population, our board or our staff doesn't look like that. How do we change that? How do we make that representation? As I said, we could talk on that one for hours, and there's some hot button issues within it, on both sides of it, and it's complicated.
I think with respect to parents, the messaging is really important from the organization and the schools to promote the girl athletes, the women coaches. Even without quotas, it could be something as a volunteer award that goes to a woman coach, or that highlighting the play of a girl baseball player, or little things like that do have an impact. So those are things to consider as well.
I wanted to actually go back to the previous question for a minute. We had a question in the chat, and it's okay if you don't know off the top of your head. But Dr. Dudley asked, are there currently any examples of a citywide standard that support girls? Do you know any off the top of your head? If you don't, that's fine.
Well, I know here in DC, girls can play baseball, and they do at the high school varsity level, and there's really good girl baseball players. But as far as it being a mandate, I think it's just not frowned upon. I don't think there's anything specific in place. But I know here at our local high school, it's encouraged, and that's in part because there is a strong DC. I'm in Washington, DC, and there's a very strong DC girls baseball community that Justine is involved with as well. In terms of, they go and play in tournaments, and so I'm not aware of a city standard, but I know it's welcome here.
Thank you, Dr. Dudley, for that question. Appreciate it. So we'll forward on to the next question here.
There is one more question about that question.
Oh, thanks, Sam.
Do you want to go ahead, David?
Yeah, I can't quite see it for some reason. Do you mind?
Okay. Senior asked, who are the sports stakeholders?
Hmm. Yeah, what I would ask the panelists is, who do you think are the stakeholders in that conversation? So I'll go back to the last one that we had. So who are the stakeholders besides parents, schools, parents and administrators? Who else could take part in that conversation to shape and prioritize women's athletics?
The boards of directors of your local leagues, the city-wide or community-wide Department of Parks and Rec that host programs. I think the schools are super important in that discussion, because when we talk about girls dropping out early, they also start later than boys. So to the extent you could make parents, parent-teacher associations aware of opportunities for girls to participate at a young age, like 5 years old, or, the better off you are, because the sooner the girls get involved, the more confidence they have. If you put in some of these other measures, hopefully as we grow, that we will keep them in the games longer.
I think I would add to that the leagues, for all those same reasons. Leagues are often independently run. Some are nonprofit, some are for-profit organizations. At least within soccer, we've got an interesting combination of those interests, but those are definitely stakeholders in it. And then that brings you into the community and anyone who's advertising with those larger events or larger leagues.
Yeah, one could argue who isn't a stakeholder.
Yeah.
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 Businesses who are looking for leaders. So I think I know everyone on this call cares. So I think people would agree, but we need more resources, and it's also the outside stakeholders who can bring those resources to us often.
Yeah, that's a great point, Justine.
Tanya just made a great point.
Yes.
Girls on the Run.
Yeah, I just wanted to call that out, Tanya. The whole community benefits when girls are in sports, 100%.
Tanya, thank you for what you do. That's a fantastic program and empowering for young girls, for sure.
Absolutely.
It is.
Our next community question. So research has shown that women coaches help with engaging and retaining girl athletes. What are some strategies you would suggest to recruit women coaches? So this kind of dovetails with what Nicole was talking about earlier, but would love to hear from the other panelists, and Nicole too, if you want to expand on that.
One of the things that Baseball for All does, we help communities start girls baseball teams and create events for them to be in. So they get to meet other girls. So originally in our first year, it was like all just mostly male coaches. So we decided that every coach had to have a woman on the coaching staff. That they're allowed 4 coaches, and at least one had to be. And the first year, everyone was grabbing a mom literally off the bench to have her sit there in the dugout and fill that mandate. But then, sometimes you would see like a really qualified woman, and those teams were winning. And so then, parents coaches, they started saying, where can we find qualified women? And now, of course, we have women who are head coaches on our teams, but that mandate made the men aware that there was not a woman on the coaching staff with them, versus they would have never really probably thought of that. And so our girls are then seeing that they could become coaches. And that is actually happening within our program, where the girls are graduating and then they're becoming coaches, or they're 15 and they're now coaching 12-year-olds as well as playing. So it really creates that 360 loop. And I think the mandate was not only good for the girls, but it forced men to think, where are the women who could be doing this and helping our team?
And Justine, was there initial pushback when you implemented that mandate, or is it?
The pushback was literally choosing the mother that was willing to just move from the stands to the dugout. That's how they kind of like said, fine, we'll do this. And they did that.
Right there.
We don't get any pushback now. Everyone loves the idea.
Yeah.
I think for soccer, we see some of the same things you're talking about in baseball, but soccer, each sport is a little bit different. And soccer is one I have the most experience with, and that's a sport that came to the US almost as girls and boys at the same time in the 70s, and girls getting a nice getting a nice bump thanks to Title IX and it being a cheap, high participation number sport to implement for colleges. So in the 80s, there was a bump in girls and women's soccer. And so now we're seeing large numbers of girls playing, and we're starting to see women enter the coaching ranks. But what we're not seeing is women advance from the lower or mid-tier coaching to the higher level at the same percentage that they're playing. At the NCAA level, I believe, I forget what the entire national average is, but one of the lowest numbers of representation of females coaching women's soccer teams is within soccer, or women's sports teams is within soccer. I want to say it's at 37% of NCAA schools with women's soccer have a female head coach, and we're 50 years after Title IX. So I think we get girls and women in, we put them on the track, but they get off at some reason. The standard was always, oh, well, they go have babies. Well, I think there's other reasons. In fact, that maybe their careers are stagnating and they're not advancing, and they're realizing I'm not going to advance in this. So why am I going to stay? Because no one's going to hire me as a director of a club. I am a director of a youth club in New York, and I think there are maybe fewer than 5 women in a similar role in the entire state. And there's like hundreds of clubs. And then you multiply that across the country. So for me, I see it as the retaining, and whether that's mandating you have someone on the staff, whether that's mandating you have them in their board. Yeah, I think that would go a long way in keeping them in the game, is having their needs and experiences also normalized, just like we ask the athletes, just like we want to normalize the needs of the athletes.
And it feeds back to that stat earlier about the lack of role models.
Yeah.
So and it's just a never-ending cycle. You're not going to have the role models if they're not lifted up initially.
Yeah. And the original argument we always heard was, well, the women don't have experience. They hadn't played in college. They didn't play here. Well, now they have. We've got a whole generation of women who played in college and some who played pro. So you can't use that argument anymore. It's done, but it's still used.
Yeah, and David, I think that's what our parents have now loved the most about our female coaches, is that they are role models and they can see the difference, and they can see their daughters talking about this woman.
Exactly.
And how, maybe they'll do it again. That'll be them. The parents can see that change in their girls.
Justine, I'm curious, have you heard of other programs that have implemented a similar mandate that you did?
I don't know of any. We don't use the word mandate.
Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say mandate.
I mean, I use that word, but we don't actually use it. We want people to feel free.
Yes.
But
It falls in that quota category. We don't talk about that.
It must be a woman
Fight club
on your staff. But I don't. It was just something that I thought made sense.
No.
And we do have teams where only women are coaching that team.
Oh, so all 4 coaches on that squad are women.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
It's rare, but it happens.
That's great.
The other thing I've heard from parents on this topic is that it not only serves as role models for girls to see the women up there, it also shows boys that women belong in sports. So you're sending a message that could have lifelong effects about the strength of women and girls. So there are those fantastic long-term societal issues that it impacts that we wouldn't even think of, except for parents mentioning them.
I would love to see more females coaching male teams.
Yeah.
That's a huge, whenever I get the opportunity to do it, I jump on it, whether it's a young team or an older team, simply because they're the ones that need to see it, because now they're going to see their peers, the girls that are their age and in a different way. They're going to see women in leadership, and it's going to become normalized and valued, because we don't value the girls as, oh, you're just coaching the girls. It's the dumping or the proving ground. But if you're coaching the boys, now you're seen as a little bit more valuable, even if you're not. It's the same coach.
Right.
So anytime I have the opportunity to have a female lead in a male program, absolutely jump on it. It will have a larger impact long term.
And Nicole, I know you went through a similar situation. I believe you were coaching a boys and girls team, and then they had you in a separate quarter from the other coaches. It was complete separation.
They had me in a hotel.
Yeah. Right. So I don't know if you don't have to go into all the details, but how did that experience kind of shape your mindset with these sort of issues?
Well, it kind of brought home the fact that a woman coach is in fact a role model for these young boys. I was a coach in a situation, a little league tournament just this past summer, and they hadn't dealt with having women managers before, and they had two. And I had an all boys team, and the other woman coach had an all boys team, and I just don't think they were equipped. They hadn't thought of it. And I know that they're thinking about it now, and they're trying to put some solutions in place and addressing things like that. But you could see the kids say, well, wait a minute, why aren't you here? That sort of thing. So you do have a big impact on these kids. And if the kids can notice things like that, it just goes to show that having a woman as a coach for these boys is impactful.
Yeah, Nicole, that's how we originally connected.
Yes.
You've told that story that you went through. I just think it's a powerful message to get out there. So thank you for sharing it. Moving on to another question here. So Justine, this is probably right up your alley here, but feel free, other panelists, you can certainly chime in. What are your thoughts about girls playing softball with other girls versus playing baseball with boys? I promise Justine did not submit this. This is a question that came in. What do you say to critics that say girls have softball? Why do they need baseball?
If you tell a girl she can't play baseball, what else will she think she can't do? So softball is a fine sport, and I've, the history of it, our modern history of softball and baseball and girls playing the different sports is when Little League was sued in 1973 that girls should be allowed to play Little League. What Little League did in response was create a softball league. And so some girls went on to play baseball, but the majority got the message that softball was for them. Mm-hmm. And so that's really the modern divide of softball versus baseball. To me, they're just two different sports. And I think it's a social justice issue when we tell a girl she can't do something because of her gender, same with a boy. And in this case, it is that girls are playing baseball. And so to say that baseball and softball are equivalent, they're just not. And the easiest way to say that they're not is, okay, let's have the boys play softball and the girls play baseball. And they'd go, what? That's a crazy idea. What? Because they're two different sports and they can both be two great sports. So we just think that access should be given to girls who want to play, and that's imperative. I mean, when I talk about all of the tribulations our girls have had to play the game, one girl was cutting herself. She's 12 years old. All she wants to do is play junior high baseball, but now it's a whole conversation with the school. It's a whole conversation with the conference. And she's just a 12-year-old girl who wants to play baseball. And so that to me is why I get up every day and do this, because these girls deserve better. And it may seem like it's just baseball, but it's not. It's part of who they are. And being told they can't do that and fulfill that part, to me, is just really wrong.
Cinia, boys don't necessarily throw the ball harder than girls, and girls will not get hurt catching the boys' baseballs.
Yeah, I would say that on many sports. That's an argument we get in soccer too. Somebody even recently floated giving younger girls a lighter soccer ball because they just couldn't handle striking it. And a few leagues tried it out. Thankfully, I've seen that disappear, but they're just weaker and they just can't handle it. Is pardon my language, but a bunch of BS. There are some boys, especially before puberty, where they vary more by kid than by gender. Once you hit puberty, yes, boys on average tend to be bigger, but not always. And sometimes the girls are just smarter, so they get out of the way of the ball, or at least, or they know how to move to get behind it and handle it in a way. So I think that's let them
Well,
deal with it.
And I'd just like to add, David, this would probably be a different soapbox if I had more time.
There's
but-
many soapboxes.
Yeah.
that I have. I
So
got
I
a few here.
The bottom line is that not enough people think girls and boys are really equal. That
Right.
girls can fall down and scrape their knee and be okay just like a boy can.
Yeah.
And so we have a system that's creating girls as unfortunate, softer athletes. Like let's make this easier for them. Coaches who run practices where it's just 10 girls waiting in line for their turn, so that they don't break a sweat, these type of things. So I think if you really believe girls and boys are equal, then all of these questions kind of go to the side and we start treating them like athletes. And I often tell our girls, especially girls I haven't met, and I come in for a clinic and I say, look, if someone's not making you hustle, you need to make sure they believe in you, and it's like, you are responsible for how hard you work, but it should be just granted, like the boys have it. Like, you're going to go sprint and this is it. And because you're an athlete, that's what I want my girls to know. They're athletes and they can work hard and they can fall down. And I hope that message goes further, it is really something that becomes the norm, which it should be, frankly.
And we think a lot that girls can learn from the boys, but I think it goes both ways on that. When I've had the opportunity to train higher level players, whether it's high school or college level, and train the men and women together, whether it's for a goalkeeping session or a specific technical session, what I find is initially there may be a little bit of the guys being like, oh my gosh, we've got to train with the women, or the girls being like, I'm intimidated. But in reality, they start learning from each other, because a lot of the guys at times will get away with just reaction and strength, especially in like the goalkeeping position, whereas it tends to be female players are not as large, so they have to rely on other skills like their ball skills, their understanding of the game, and ability to play in different ways. So by having them train together, you get the opportunity for them to learn the other piece of it that they might not see in their single gender training. Doesn't mean you do it all the time, but having that integration, then there's also a respect, because the boys and the male athletes realize that the female athletes are just as good, and there's things that they can learn from them, and vice versa. And for me, I think it's just like having a female coach at times coaching male athletes. Once there's that mutual respect, I think this conversation becomes, we can put some of our soapboxes away, not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah.
There are two moments from that HBO piece that I mentioned. It's on Justine's website too. One of them was the girl players knew that the boys didn't take them seriously when they took them field, until the end of the game, where the girls absolutely dominated and won the game. And that changed the boys' mindset. And Justine, you talked about the emotional toll as well, that these girl athletes have to have this burden. And I would say for everyone just to Google Maria Pepe. I think I'm saying her name right. Justine, do you want to mention her a little bit and what she went through?
Maria Pepe is the one who sued Little League with Now back in 1973. She was playing on the team. Her teammates were all like, this is great, whatever. She's just a teammate. And then Little League came in. Someone complained from the opposing team. And Little League said that if you don't take her off your team, you are not going to be allowed to play. Your charter will be gone. She won Little League and she won the case. She's changed everyone. She's changed so much, but she never got to play. And she breaks down in tears when she talks about when the adults came and took her shirt away. And I'd love to say this is history, but I have the exact same situation happening with a girl who's trying to play on our high school team. And the high school already knows her. She's played with them all. And it's the conference saying she can't play. We're going to fine you if you play with her. Wow. And so it's like, how do we go through these battles? And that's something that Baseball for All helps with. But, it's not quite history. And
That's a Title IX lawsuit.
and the player has to sue.
Yeah. That's unfortunate.
Yes, there's all these rules like this around the country that keep girls from playing.
and across all sports, and the rules look a little different, but it's across the board. I mean, there's rules within soccer too. It's not history, unfortunately. The panty check era is almost gone, but you still hear of it periodically, of making sure that you really are a girl because you're too good to be a girl. I think we all, those of us through Title IX, or I'm a Title IX baby, so those of us grew up through that kind of know those stories, both whether it's us or friends. You're just too good. You can't be a girl.
There have only been 20 girls at the Little League World Series at this point. And that was what, 73? I mean, that's almost 50 years ago itself.
That's another illuminating stat. We'll move on unless anyone else had any more comments on this slide. Next question that we had: what advice would you give to a girl who is pressured to change the sport they play?
Don't fight.
I would have killed to play hockey growing up, and we were not allowed. Where I lived, the girls didn't play, so hockey was not an option, but that should be not the case anymore. Use social media. Social media is the biggest tool in women's sports arsenal right now, and there are advocates on there that are ready to advocate and help navigate. So hopefully you're not waiting and having to see other people take advantage of the law that you sued on, but hopefully the changes get made sooner. Social media, find an advocate in your sport or outside the sport. Women's sports work together. The U.S. women's soccer team and the U.S. women's hockey team, that U.S. hockey team's contract negotiation that happened a few years ago, they were guided through that and did things differently than the U.S. women's soccer team on the advice of the U.S. women's soccer team. They handled things in a different way. And that was the biggest asset because the U.S. soccer team has gone through that and is still going through that. But find an advocate on social media or to get into a network on it. Doesn't mean you have to be public on social media, but find that advocate, look at that organization, look at the names that are involved in it. Is there someone that you have a connection or your organization has a connection to, and get an ally?
That's a great point. What could an organization, so this is kind of a short-term, long-term vision. What could an organization do tomorrow to make their programming more accessible and inclusive? And what could they do over the course of a year? So I think this is really relevant for all the programs on today. What could they institute?
I would say today, I would immediately start messaging the fact that you're putting a priority on girls' involvement and inclusion in sports, and as well as coaches, female coaches, to serve as their role models, and put your code of conduct in place to address potential bias situations that you can try to see coming. And then over the course of the year, I would have some coaches clinics and promote again the girls as they're participating. But you kind of have to, again, this is the top bottom approach. Set the rules up top, and then help them by giving them resources to address any sort of bias.
I would say look at the images you're using. This can be done short-term and long-term. If all of the photos that you have for your organization are girls chatting and being cute and social and having a water break, and boys, even though they're in the uniform, and boys playing, change that. They need to be the girls actually playing and in an active environment, not just standing there looking good in a uniform. Because a lot of times you'll go through a website and you're not sure whether they actually, at least with soccer, I'm like, are they boys only? Oh wait, there's a few girls on the water break. Okay, so I guess it's a co-ed organization. So make sure the photos that you use, there's nothing wrong with showing girls on a water break if you're showing boys who are, sitting on the bench too, doing something else. But make sure you're showing those photos are representative of what you want your organization to look like, even if it doesn't look like that yet. both on any kind of diversity and inclusion on that. If you're going towards a particular goal, make your sites, make your posts, make your any materials you put out there look like what you want to be. As much as you can. Don't fake it. Don't hire, non-athletes, please. They did that at a Hummel at one point, hired lovely models, you could tell, to march around in the soccer uniforms at our soccer convention. And I don't think any of them could have lifted 50 pounds, but they were all super cute. So don't manufacture it, but use something that you have. And you might have to go out of your way and create some other photos too, and create opportunities for those experiences.
Yeah, for us, get rid of your pink and purple registrations.
Please, please.
I can't emphasize enough about the representation you're showing with the photos, with your coaching, your language, he or she. There's nothing wrong with saying he and she or people. Mm-hmm. You could take gender right out of it in your stuff.
Athletes, players.
If you don't have enough coaches, you don't have to have all women for coach all the teams, but like you could at least, find women to come in and guest coach or guest clinic and have older kids come and, sit on the bench with the younger ones and help them out. I know that it's going to be hard to just get a whole bunch of women coaching at the very beginning, but there are women there and there are older girls who can be role models and you can fit them in to the trainings that you already have. And that is true with the boys as well. You could bring these same women to come in and train the boys so that it's truly inclusive, and it will become the norm. I promise it will become the norm. If you have women coaching the boys, women coaching, and you're just kind of interacting and intermixing, no one is going to start to think it's not the normal way. I know my nephew's 11 years old, and from forever, he's like, girls play baseball, girls coach. Like, he doesn't know any difference. And that's kind of what is possible.
Adding a little bit on what you just said with that. Sometimes if you can't staff fully with females yet or have the number that you want, clinics are an awesome option, because a lot of times women are willing to come in. Hey, I'm going to help your organization out. I know that you have you're working to get more women involved, and sure, you want me to work your clinic for 2 hours or all Saturday? Absolutely. We did that at a club I worked with in the city. We brought in coaches from rival clubs. We brought in coaches from college levels, from high school levels, and we had an all-female staff. And in the club itself, there were maybe 3 of us who were women, but we had 10 coaches, and then we brought in the high school girls. So now for the younger girls, anyone under high school, it was an all-female staff of players that they could look up to, coaches, and it wasn't their full experience, but it was a one day. It's not going to solve everything, but one day is better than not at all.
That it's possible. You're not alone.
Yep.
Just in that clinic alone, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Justine, that is also one of the things I had suggested that Little League do, and that we're trying to implement here in DC, is take the few women baseball coaches that we do know and have them run clinics throughout the Little Leagues in the city to draw in potential female coaches.
Yeah, and just to give you a stat, when Monet Davis pitched in the World Series, the league that she was in, it was a 3% rise of female participation in the league, just because
they had a role model, right? A superstar role model.
Yeah, and you couldn't say girls can't do it anymore, because look, she just did.
And now what's cool is that they actually, I don't know how many years ago that was, but now they started a girls team that went to our national tournament.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
And so now it wasn't just one girl. Now they could look around and see 500 other girls.
That's awesome.
That's a great stat. I like that. Thank you for all those responses to that. That's great. I think this is a question that probably would resonate with a lot of organizations. A male coach or a leader in the organization may be uncomfortable asking about sports bras. How could they approach the conversation with the child?
That's an awesome question. I'm guessing that's towards me a little bit. on that one. Believe it or not, I am not like the sports bra goddess or anything. And I always just treated it as something that was a necessary part of playing. So thinking of it as a piece of equipment, you want the males involved to be educated, but if a male coach or administrator is uncomfortable, then the female athlete is going to be uncomfortable, especially if they're younger. If you have staff to help, ask someone you're comfortable with. Like, I'm always happy to answer questions to friends or others who are like, I don't know, is this kind of awkward? I'm like, ask it. And sort of, for me, I kind of diffuse things with a joke, but I'm also kind of in a different spot. I'm not Dolly Parton, but we need to make sure we have sizes for everybody. I think just normalizing it and starting to have those conversations, have that awkward conversation with someone that you're comfortable with. Maybe it's a wife, maybe it's a sister, maybe it's a daughter, or maybe it's a coach within the organization, or someone that you know from outside your organization. Say, we want to do something with sports bras. We want to make sure we are providing this equipment for the girls. Can you help me navigate the language? Utilizing the women in your organization, which I know isn't always the case. So for guys that don't have access to females to have that initial conversation, I usually treat it like a piece of equipment and look at it like the t-shirt size, because from really the extra small to extra large, it's generally sized like a t-shirt. There's nuances to that, and sports bras are even less consistent than women's clothing. They're probably the most inconsistent piece after seeing as many bras as I have. But when you get to the larger sizes, then it becomes a different conversation. But until then, and just to start the topic, you can sort of broach it as, this is a piece of equipment. Ask your coaches or ask the players to give you the general size. Do you want a medium, small, medium, large, extra large? Do you need something bigger? Once you get past extra large, double X, then you start, the cup size and the band size tend to be important. But for the youngest levels, so you're dealing with say 11 to 14-year-olds, most of them will fit an extra small to an extra large. And you can talk about it like a t-shirt almost. You can also use a team manager or a team mom who's involved. If you've got a mom in your organization who's the go-to volunteer, ask her. She knows what your community is. Not all the communities are the same. When we give bras to organizations, we make sure that they have somebody on the ground who understands the community and can give them out. I guess the best example of how that works is we give bras to Goals Haiti. They're a soccer organization. They are a US-based nonprofit. They operate out of Washington State, and in Haiti, they have an organization that's been on the ground for a number of years. And when we first contacted with them, my question to them is, when we get the bras there, because we were going to ship them, when we get the bras there, who's going to distribute them and how are you going to handle that? And the answer was, there was a young woman that they've hired on their staff who came through their program. That is the perfect solution. She knows what their needs are. She speaks the language. She understands culturally, whether it's a modesty piece or whether it's a support piece that they're looking for. So find somebody in the community who understands it and ask the awkward questions. If you have to do it over coffee or quietly, do it. We'd prefer to have those questions asked awkwardly and get equipment that we need, instead of me being handed a triple extra large sports bra. Here, I thought you needed this. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. So instead of getting in those awkward situations, find someone you're comfortable enough, or talk with a couple people. If you're not comfortable with a one-on-one conversation, put 3 or 4 people in a room and say, look, we want to deal with equipment. This is a piece of the equipment. How do we do this? Unfortunately, your equipment reps aren't always going to be the people I would turn to. Look to your community first.
Yeah, and I will add, I'm a huge, as I was explaining to Sarah and Nicole, I'm a huge bra advocate. I don't think I could have said the word bra when I was 13 out loud. But when I see someone who I think might be in the wrong size, I actually go to the parent rather than the player and just give some suggestions on where they might be able to find something different. And maybe, just maybe, if a man's going to coach girls, maybe like part of the job interview is to say bra out loud, period. And make sure they can say these words. But yeah, I usually tend to go to the, I tend to go to the parent if I think something's up.
Yeah. And so if the parent's available, absolutely.
If they're available, yeah.
Yeah, I had done that conversation with, we had a player who had 2 fathers. So once she hit puberty, they had some things that they never dealt with themselves. So we had to have some of those conversations. She's an awkward child and she's at that age. So I had the conversation quietly with them off to the side. And I think that's absolutely a valid way to do it. You know your community better. but have those awkward conversations. It's important, and then they won't be so awkward anymore. And it's kind of fun to see when girls get comfortable with it. And it becomes, oh yeah, look, did you see the colors of this bra? This is awesome. Or I love this bra, you know, and they start having those conversations publicly, and suddenly it's not awkward anymore at all.
Yeah, and I told Sarah and Nicole that I switched sports, I switched positions, all because my breast size went up and I didn't have the right bra,
Yeah.
and I was embarrassed.
Mhm.
So what can I do to stop that embarrassment? Stop running. And
Yeah.
that was how I dealt with it. And I have to imagine I'm not the only girl who has made that decision.
As we talked about, I'm not well endowed, but I wouldn't run without a bra. And I would never have played without a bra. And one time in high school, when I accidentally wore a Victoria's Secret bra instead of a sports bra, one realized underwire was not the thing to do. So yeah, it's trial and error. And most of us will have stories like that, especially if you've had moms or parents or members of your organization that have come through playing sports. The first time you see an athlete wearing two bras, and I'm like, why are you wearing two bras? Well, now I know, because I couldn't relate to that, but she certainly could, for support.
Well, thank you for that kind of normalizing this conversation. How do you approach it? I think it's really valuable.
I'll jump in, David. We have a good
Go ahead.
question from Lauren in the chat. Is there any suggestion for any virtual training tidbits that anyone's used for coaches and volunteers to help people explore their bias and understand better ways to include, cultivate, and empower girls in your program? Any sort of resources that would be good to use?
Women's Sports Foundation has quite a bit of information available about ways to recruit and the girls, the importance of, and how to retain them. Those are things we can make available to David, maybe to disseminate after.
Absolutely.
Would that work?
Yeah. Yep, certainly can.
Let me take a note.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You're looking for numbers to back up stats and stuff. And when you want to make an argument, the Tucker Center is great. The Tucker Center at the University of Minnesota does research on girls and women in sport. They tend to be focused on the college level because numbers and statistics are available. It gets a little fuzzy at the youth level, but because higher education institutions receive federal funding, they have to keep records. So we know how many teams there are. We know how many coaches there are. We know what the demographics there are. So when you're looking for those kind of things by the numbers and then some other links into different resources, it's a multi-sport, all sports. And they've got some great, like the Women's Sports Foundation, they're just they're just different. Aspen Institute is another one to look at. They have some resources as well. I'm sure these are ones you guys have all gone to too. It's a similar community here.
Definitely.
Well, I want to be wary of time as well. It's 2:29, so we can end right on time too. But I first wanted to ask the panelists, are there any final thoughts that you want to give the group to? This will also be available on our approved program page at the end. So anyone that is approved organization can view this as well. So is there any final thoughts that you want to provide to these organizations?
My thoughts would be just start somewhere. Take the first step. You know, that's how it starts. Something is better than nothing, and just keep moving from there.
I think being here is the first step because you know you have to address something and you know there's something you want to work on. We're not going to have a cookie cutter answer, but take the resources that you have, ask other organizations, and as Justine said, take that first step. This is the first bit of it. Just continue it, and it will be awkward sometimes, but that's, hey, you gotta deal with it.
You know, I just agree with what Justine and Sarah just said, and I would, you know, we talked about mandates and quotas. It's like what girls in sports are dealing with, what women are dealing with in life. It's the difference of equity versus equality. You do need the equity to get to the equality. Being here is the first step in the equity process. And then if you think about it in those terms, you'll find even more ways than the resources we provide you, because we're like, well, how can we make this more fair? If you have the equity in your mind and you implement it, equality will come. So we just have to keep fighting for it.
Well, thank you all, Justine, Nicole, Sarah. I'm grateful that you took time out of your days to come on and talk to the programs and to provide a lot of insights and valuable conversation starters. Like I said at the beginning, I think this was a great conversation starter, and I hope we can keep elevating that conversation too. So I appreciate that you all hopped on and gave those insights, and to the programs too. Thank you for all that you're doing, and hopefully take away a lot from this conversation, and hopefully we can continue it down the road.
Feel free to reach out anytime. It's just reach out.
Absolutely.
We're happy to answer any other questions offline if there's something specific. At least I am. I'm pretty accessible. Sarah at the Sports Bra Project. Shoot me an email and we can have that awkward conversation where it's not so awkward.
I was going to ask the panelists, do you mind if we provide your contact info to the programs? Is that
Absolutely.
okay?
Yep.
Great.
Absolutely. Please do.
Okay.
We don't mind.
Awesome. Well, I thank everyone again, and happy Friday, and I hope everyone has a good weekend. Thank you for the conversation.
So, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll talk to you soon.